Hi, I'm Kyle from the Secure UX team, and today I want to walk through the latest iteration on our MVC proposal for enabling users to configure security analyzers directly from the UI with a merge request. The MVC is intended to facilitate the existing workflow of configuration while really trying to improve the learnability for the user on how these analyzers are set up per project. The focus today is improving on a loose end for DAST and container scanning and making sure that we're not walking users into a failed pipeline. And we'll take a closer look at why that would be the case in just a minute. I did link a longer video that kind of walks through this flow more extensively and the discovery, the engineering and UX discovery and user research that led to this direction. But yeah, let's walk through some of the current flow for when the user would be configuring SAST, license compliance, or dependency scanning. And then we'll take a look at tying up the loose end or an iteration to tie up the loose end or improve for DAST and container scanning. It'll probably make more sense just walking through this flow though really quickly. So if we're on a project right now, and if the user came to this security and compliance section here in the left navigation and selected configuration, they would land on this configuration page. There's the ability with these radio boxes then to select them. So let's say that we select SAST and dependency scanning and license compliance. We then have an active create merge request button. When the user initiates that, there are some system actions that would take place, which is identifying if a YAML file exists. Let's say it does. Well, if it'll be created or added, those respective templates will be added to that file to the default branch. The changes will be committed. It'll trigger a pipeline, and merge requests created will be created with the changes. After the user had selected the call to action to create the merge request, they'll land on the actual merge request, which now included static application security testing, also known as SAST, license compliance, dependency scanning analyzer templates. That can be seen in the changes and of course the commits that's made. But those are the core requirements, and of course there are other variables to each of those that could be added. And that's why we're surfacing the documentation here, that they can take a closer look at them individually. But they have a unified merge request right now with the templates ready to go. So they could merge it from here, or they could, like I said, take a closer look at the documentation. We're also, like I said earlier, facilitating the existing experience. At this point, and we also saw this with our research, is that the learnability aspect was very strong. We saw that all users that we tested understood, like, oh, okay, this is how it's going to be added. It's through here. It's through, and they would dive into the documentation a little bit more. But we also want to surface something that while this is configured to the default branch, all subsequent feature branches will include the scan. It's an important note, and this gives us an opportunity in the merge request to surface things like that. Okay, so that's the case if these three analyzers were selected. But let's take a look at the case if dynamic application security testing, just DAST, or container scanning were selected. This is the loose ends that I referred to earlier. The problem that we're looking at here is it's not just as simple as adding a template, which also there's an include there. for these two. But for DAST, we also need the user to designate which URL is going to be scanned. And for container scanning, we need them to confirm the Docker image. So let's take a look at what this flow would be if they selected these two. They could also have selected SAST or one of the other scanners, and it would work the same way, but the following flow would occur if DAST or container scanning were selected. Okay, so they select these two and they create the merge request. The system does a few things that are a little bit different than the other flow. It adds the selected templates and variables to the GitLab YAML file. We'll take a look at that in a minute. The commit is also a CI skip commit, and therefore the pipeline would be skipped. And then the merge request is created with the changes. Okay, we see here we're still leveraging the documentation in here, although it's a little bit more extensive for DAST and container scanning, and we're really surfacing those key variables that are needed. So in the case of SAST, we're telling them additional configuration is required, and here's why. Link to the documentation. There's certainly other variables that could be needed, but this is the one that needs to be committed to avoid a failed pipeline. And container scanning, the user just needs to confirm that this is indeed the Docker image name. And so we're leveraging our documentation and also surfacing that they need to add this. So based on what we saw with user studies, the learnability aspect, this is going to help facilitate that, and I think that they could understand from here what the additional requirements are. With the skip CI and WIP work in progress, that's additionally helping us, and it's letting them know that this is an incomplete merge request, and here's why in this documentation. Certainly, I think that this is an area which would be great for feedback, is how to make this documentation that we're surfacing crystal clear and crisp to the user. But we're using really the work in progress and the skip CI to make it very clear that additional requirements are needed. And I just want to scroll down and just show it would operate just like any skip CI or the work in progress. The experience, though, would just reinforce that. If the user jumped over to changes, let me just zoom in on this a little bit. We can continue to leverage our documentation directly in the additional commits that were added. So in this case, let's say that there was an include here. We have these certain templates if they were added. And then we have the variables down here. These are the two variables that we're kind of focusing on. For container scanning, it's confirming this image tag. And so what we have here is just confirm image tag. It's blanked out and it has the link to the documentation. So when they do come here and take a look at the changes that were made, we can surface this directly to them here. So for example, with the URL that we need, it has kind of a to-do, and this is the URL website to be scanned. So it's learning that this is the case for DAST. And of course, here's our documentation. So it's really redirecting them back to the documentation. And even in this changes file aims to help educate the user on what's needed to make this a successful merge request. Okay. So I just want to jump to one other area that's kind of related to configuration, another flow that we will soon see on the dashboard. It's not yet there, but here on the group dashboard, we actually show at a group level, or will show, what projects in there are or are not being tested and what projects are out of date. For this, we're focusing on the projects that are untested. If they are untested, that means that there are no analyzers that have been applied to that project, and so we're surfacing this at the group level. Otherwise, the user would have to go project to project to figure that out, so this aims to help that. From here, they could click an untested project, which they do here, and that will bring them to the configuration page. Then from there, if they wanted to configure it in a certain way, they could with the flows that we just took a look at. In the current state, they would have to either just go to the main documentation page and take a look at what's needed for each of them individually. So all of that will lead to a merge request inevitably, and that's why those initial flows we think can really help this and really facilitate this process. It just gets them one step closer to the inevitable merge request that they'll need to make. Yeah. Well, that's the latest iteration. Really appreciate you watching. I think from a UX standpoint, we'd love some feedback on these different flows, especially the ones pertaining to DAST and container scanning. One thing I can add to this is down the road, there could be an input box or something like that here on this screen to add that URL. But this is in the spirit of iteration. How can we keep this small or as small as possible? And there's a lot of different variables that could be added to each of these. And you know, we're trying to do that outside of the user interface for this iteration, or at least that's what this proposal is about. So another great area for feedback would be, what is the type of specific copy and documentation that we want to have here? That would be very helpful. So otherwise, thanks for watching, and talk to you soon.